One thing has become crystal clear in the current coronavirus crisis. We have an acute shortage of testing. Every day on the news, we hear a story about how far behind we are on testing. And we know that testing is very critical to screen, diagnose, and treat COVID-19 patients. Without testing, we are flying blind. Well, the good news is that many commercial labs and companies have now come up with several of these tests, and FDA has authorized a lot of them for emergency use in this crisis. Hello and welcome. I am Naveen Agarwal, and I help medical companies build safe products through a quality management system which is not only compliant, but also agile and focused on the needs of patients and doctors. So call me or email me with your questions and let me know how I can help you. In this video, I'm going to provide a very high-level overview of 3 different types of tests that can be used for coronavirus testing. Our interest in these tests is not only because of the current crisis, but also because any diagnostic equipment, assay, or kit that is used for testing is considered to be a medical device by the FDA. And in normal circumstances, they will have to go through a very rigorous evaluation process. But because of the urgency of the situation, FDA has provided some guidance for authorization during this emergency use. So we will talk about the criteria that FDA has used and some of the performance attributes of these tests that we should be careful about. So let us look at these 3 different types of tests in the next slide. The 3 types of tests shown here are RT-PCR tests, antigen tests, and antibody tests. RT-PCR stands for reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. The main idea is to isolate a very specific section of the viral RNA, reverse transcribe it into a complementary DNA sequence, then create multiple copies so they can be detected using specially designed molecular probes. This type of testing is useful in the very early phase of infection, where small quantities of the virus can be detected in samples from the nasal cavity or from the throat, even before the symptoms appear. It can be used very effectively to screen infected patients and isolate them to limit the transmission of the virus. Most of the tests authorized by the FDA so far have been RT-PCR tests. One of the challenges with these tests is that they have to be done at a special lab, and they take a little bit long time to produce results. There are very few options available for point-of-care testing, for example, in a hospital or a clinic. One exception is the ID Now test from Abbott, which can be done in a healthcare facility, and it can produce results in a matter of minutes. The second type of test is an antigen test, which goes after specific proteins on the surface of the virus. This can be done after symptoms appear, but requires the knowledge of antibodies that can bind to these proteins. This virus is very new. So far, the knowledge about antibodies is not yet available, and that's why we don't see any antigen test out so far. Finally, an antibody test can be used to detect the presence of antibodies in a blood sample drawn from patients. Antibody tests are also called serological tests. As the disease progresses, our immune system responds by generating antibodies in the blood to fight the infection. Early on, the IgM antibodies are generated, and later, after the patient has recovered, the IgG antibodies are present. One of these tests authorized by the FDA is Cellex Q Rapid test, which can detect both IgM and IgG antibodies. This is actually a very useful tool because it can help us find people who might have had the infection, but they may have recovered without showing any symptoms or without having to go to a doctor. If we very rapidly deploy this type of testing at mass scale, it can help us understand the true rate of infection and also assess the level of immunity in broader population. Note that we are just using these as examples and not endorsing specific tests from these manufacturers. So the good news is that FDA has authorized many of these tests. As of early April, there are about 30 different tests that have been authorized for use during this emergency. This is not an approval or a clearance of a diagnostic device, but only meant to be used during the emergency. And some of the criteria that FDA uses is really looking at the benefit-risk consideration in context of any other available alternative and the urgency of the situation. This virus being so new, there aren't any other alternatives, and we have to make sure we test quickly. And that is why FDA has come out with a guidance that offers their perspective of what they are looking for. For diagnostic devices, the important performance attributes are limit of detection, sensitivity, and cross-reactivity. It's also important to have clinical validation data, but in this circumstance, FDA has allowed test developers to use what they call spiked samples in lieu of the clinical performance data. And they have provided criteria by which they will evaluate the success of those performance attributes. So I highly recommend that you download this guidance from the FDA from their website. There are also other resources like FAQs and webinars that FDA has organized recently. There's a lot of material out there that you can take advantage of to learn more about these tests, or if you are thinking about developing your own tests. So in conclusion, testing is very, very important for us to screen, diagnose, and treat COVID-19 patients. We talked about 3 different types of tests: RT-PCR tests, antigen tests, and antibody tests. Good news is that we have a lot of these tests now available for use during this emergency, but we are still falling behind. This crisis has caused us enormous stress in our society, and it is putting a lot of pressure on our healthcare capacity. So it's very important for us to scale up testing and deploy at mass scale so that we can really try to get out of this crisis as soon as possible. Thank you for your attention and interest. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. You can also visit my website www.exceedqm.com to learn more about this topic. I have an article on my blog that provides a lot more details and offers more guidance. So I really invite you to check that out. You can also sign up for my monthly newsletter. It takes only 15 minutes to catch up with the news with insights that I provide based on my experience, and it's absolutely free.